In a courtroom packed with lawyers, judges, and cameras, a 3-year-old girl stood trembling in a pale blue dress. She hadn't spoken in weeks. Not to doctors, not to her mother, not to anyone. Experts said she might never speak again. But on this day, something would break open. Something that would shatter a case. Something that would change justice itself. What happened next would prove that truth doesn't need a loud voice. Sometimes it just needs someone brave enough to whisper. This is the story of Lily, and the dog who gave her a voice when the world tried to keep her silent. In the hospital, they found her on the kitchen floor. Melanie Grace. I am 32 years old. Bruises covering her arms, her ribs, her face. Fractures in 3 places. Bleeding in her lungs. She had been beaten so severely that doctors weren't sure she would survive the night. I've worked homicide for 20 years. I've seen violence that would break most people. But when I saw that apartment, the blood on the walls, the shattered furniture, the broken table, I knew this was rage. This was someone trying to kill. The boyfriend, Marcus, claimed he wasn't there. He said he'd been home all night. But the evidence suggested otherwise. There were signs of a male attacker. But without a witness, without testimony, the case was circumstantial. It could fall apart. I had physical evidence. I had medical reports. I had photographs that would make anyone's stomach turn. But in court, that's not always enough. The defense would say the injuries came from something else. They would demand a witness. And that's when my investigator told me there was someone in that apartment that night. A 3-year-old girl named Lily. She was hiding under a table. Lily was found by police officers huddled under a blanket, clutching a stuffed bunny. She wouldn't let go. She wouldn't speak. She wouldn't even look at the officers who found her. For weeks, she remained silent. When Lily came to me, she was locked inside herself. Complex PTSD in a 3-year-old is devastating. She had witnessed severe violence against her mother. The human brain, especially a child's brain, responds to that kind of trauma by shutting down completely. The words get trapped. The emotions become too big. And silence becomes the only safe place left. Standard therapy wasn't working. Talk therapy requires words. Art therapy requires expression. But Lily had retreated so far into herself that even basic communication seemed impossible. I remember sitting in my office thinking, how do I put a 3-year-old on the stand? How do I ask a traumatized child to relive the worst night of her life? How do I ask her to speak when speaking means feeling all that terror again? Some of my colleagues said I shouldn't even try. They said it would cause more damage. But I also knew that without her testimony, Marcus would walk free. And the man who really did this, the man in the shadows, would never face justice. This case landed on my docket, and immediately I felt the weight of it. I've spent 30 years trying to balance justice with compassion. But this was different. This was about whether a child could be a witness, whether trauma could be translated into testimony. I didn't have answers. None of us did. That's when Dr. Aaron discovered something revolutionary. The canine unit had recently begun experimenting with therapy animals for trauma victims. And there was one dog, a German shepherd named Shadow, who had passed every test. His calmness was almost supernatural. His intuition about human emotion was uncanny. But he had never worked with a child victim before. Shadow wasn't just any police dog. He was trained to read emotional states, to sense fear, to respond to panic before it escalated. Most importantly, he knew how to create safety in chaos. But when Dr. Aaron approached me about using him with a 3-year-old, I'll admit, I was skeptical. This was uncharted territory. Dr. Aaron made the case. Children don't always have words for trauma, but they have instincts. They sense who is trustworthy. They recognize safety when they feel it. Shadow represented something Lily's mind might accept, a presence that was powerful but non-threatening, a being that couldn't judge her, a creature that might create the psychological space where words could emerge. I had seen in my research that therapy animals activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the part of the brain that handles rest and recovery. When Lily was near Shadow, her body would begin to calm. Her heart rate would slow. The amygdala, the fear center, would begin to release its grip. In that calm state, she might be able to access memories she couldn't reach when she was terrified. When Dr. Aaron suggested bringing a dog into the courtroom, I thought she was crazy. But then she explained the science, and I realized maybe this wasn't crazy. Maybe this was exactly what we needed. The morning of testimony, the courthouse was already packed. Reporters lined the hallways. Cameras waited outside. Everyone wanted to see how this would unfold. Would the child speak? Would the dog help or hurt the case? Would justice be served or would it crumble? I remember standing outside that courtroom door, my hands shaking. I had prepared for everything: tough cross-examinations, evidence disputes, legal motions. But I hadn't prepared for what it would feel like to ask a traumatized child to relive the worst night of her life. I hadn't prepared for the moral weight of that decision. At 9:47 a.m., the courtroom doors opened. First came Lily's foster mother, holding the small girl's hand. Lily wore a pale blue dress with white polka dots. A pink ribbon slipped down the side of her messy hair. In her free hand, she clutched a stuffed bunny with one ear torn and dangling. Then came Shadow. The room held its breath. This German shepherd padded across the courtroom floor with absolute composure. His brown eyes were alert but gentle. His police canine vest was pristine. He moved like he understood the weight of what was about to happen. And in many ways, he did. I'll never forget that moment. The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning. And then this beautiful dog walked in like he was carrying the truth with him. I got chills. Lily's eyes scanned the unfamiliar faces. The towering judge's bench. The stern-faced jury members. The defendant was sitting at the table. Terror flashed across her small face. Then she saw Shadow. She let go of her foster mother's hand. Without prompting, without coaching, she shuffled over to the dog and crouched beside him. And then she buried her face in his thick fur. In 30 years, I have never felt a courtroom shift so completely. The tension didn't just ease. It transformed. Everyone, and I mean everyone, understood at that moment that something real was happening. This wasn't a theater. This was a child finding safety. I watched Lily bury her face in Shadow's fur, and I prayed silently that this would work, that somehow this beautiful dog would give her the strength to speak. Lily whispered something. Only Shadow could hear it. Her lips barely moved, her breath shallow, her fingers twisting a piece of the dog's thick fur. For what felt like an eternity, but was only seconds, the entire courtroom held its collective breath. The judge leaned forward. The prosecutor's eyes widened with hope. Even the defense team seemed to sense that something unprecedented was unfolding. The hush was so profound that you could hear the faint rustling of papers, the nervous shuffle of feet, the muted click of a camera shutter quickly covered. The bailiff remained motionless. The jury members exchanged glances, not of skepticism, but of fascination. This was no longer a typical trial. This was something else entirely. A moment where law and compassion collided, where a child's fear and a dog's presence created a sanctuary within the adversarial walls of a courtroom. Then she pulled back slightly. She looked up at Shadow with wide eyes. Then she looked across the room at Marcus, the defendant, and Lily's voice, suddenly louder than anyone expected, cut through the silence like a blade through still water. He's the bad one. Chaos erupted. The defense attorney shot to his feet. Objections were shouted. The judge called for order. But none of it mattered. The jury had seen Lily's face. They had heard the unfiltered truth in her voice. They had witnessed fear and certainty colliding in four simple words. Lily, can you tell us what you remember? Lily didn't answer with words at first. Instead, she leaned over and whispered something into Shadow's ear. The courtroom held its breath. He knows. He saw. That simple statement, he knows. He saw, told me everything. She wasn't making this up. She wasn't confused. She was processing trauma through the only safe filter she had, a dog who loved her unconditionally. Rachel pulled out a coloring book. Blank pages, crayons in primary colors. Lily, would you like to draw something for Shadow? Maybe something from that night? Without speaking, Lily began to sketch. Her small hand moved across the page with deliberate purpose. She drew a room, a table, a bed, then a stick figure, herself crouched under the table with wide eyes. On the far side of the room, she drew a larger figure with angry red scribbles around its hands. That drawing was testimony. It was a child's translation of trauma into visual language. Every line was a memory. Every color choice was an emotion. And the jury understood it completely. Notice how the table is broken. Notice how Lily drew herself hiding. Notice the figure with red hands, representing anger, violence, threat. I had to instruct the jury to base their conclusions on the entirety of the evidence, not just emotional reaction. But even as I said those words, I knew it was too late. They had already felt the truth. They had already seen it through a child's eyes. I tried to discredit her. I tried to suggest she had an overactive imagination. I tried to argue that a dog can't translate anything. But every word I spoke fell flat. The courtroom wasn't listening to me anymore. They were listening to the truth that the child had finally managed to speak. Lily's voice trembled as she leaned closer to Shadow. He was shouting, she whispered, the words barely audible to the courtroom, but everyone strained to hear. Mommy said run, but I couldn't. I hid, under the table. Rachel knelt beside her, maintaining patience and gentleness. Lily reached under the witness chair and pointed to the spot beneath it. I was here, she said softly. He didn't see me, but I saw everything. The jury watched as forensic photographs were displayed on screen, the broken table matching her drawing with uncanny precision, the blanket hidden under the shelf. Every detail Lily had described, confirmed by physical evidence. It was devastating in its accuracy. A child who couldn't speak in weeks had just painted a picture of trauma so vivid that it shattered every doubt in the room. Then something happened that nobody, not even the prosecution, expected. As therapy recordings were presented, audio of Lily whispering to Shadow about the night of the attack, a pattern emerged. Her memories were consistent, detailed, accurate. Every element aligned with physical evidence. The broken table, the screaming, the figure yelling, the child hiding. Shadow, I was scared. He was shouting. Mommy said run, but I couldn't. I hid, under the table. He didn't see me, but I saw everything. That recording changed everything. It was recorded weeks before the trial. No one had coached her. No one had suggested what to say. She was simply processing her trauma through a relationship with a dog. And her memory was flawless. But the real shock came when Lily pulled out another drawing. This one was different from the others. Specific, detailed. A man with a square jaw, dark eyes, angry eyebrows drawn with harsh, deliberate strokes. My hands were literally shaking. I looked at that drawing. Then I looked at the defense table. I compared the features. And I realized Lily hadn't just drawn a generic angry man. She had drawn a specific person. Lily stood up. She walked toward the jury box. And then she did something that would change the entire trajectory of the case. She pointed directly at James Elmore, the defense attorney. That's him. I saw his eyes. They were angry. Order. Order in this courtroom. The room exploded into chaos. But Lily remained calm. She had finally said what needed to be said. She had identified not the defendant, but the man who had actually committed the crime, the defense attorney who had been hired as a cover-up. When we got that identification, we started digging. Phone records, bank statements, security footage, and what we found was devastating. Elmore wasn't just representing the defendant. He was involved in the crime. Security camera footage from an ATM downtown showed a man in a red tie, the same red tie Elmore wore in court, near the victim's apartment at 9:47 p.m. on the night of the assault. That was just 10 minutes before the 911 call. Cell phone records showed Elmore's phone had pinged near the victim's location. Bank records showed a large deposit into his account from Shell Company, and that Shell Company was linked to Martin Gates, the victim's ex-boyfriend who had a motive to silence Melanie before she could testify against him in another case. Your Honor, we believe Elmore was hired by Martin Gates to assault the victim. What was meant to be intimidation became attempted murder. And when Lily identified him in this courtroom, he knew his deception was exposed. Mr. Elmore, you are remanded into custody pending investigation. Bail is denied. Melanie Grace walked out of the hospital 6 weeks later. Her recovery was slow, painful, but determined. When she learned what her daughter had done, that Lily had spoken, that she had been heard, that she had helped catch the person who tried to kill her mother, Melanie wept. My baby saved me. When I was at my darkest, when everyone was telling me the case would fail, Lily found her voice. And Shadow gave her the courage to use it. Lily, in all my years on this bench, I have never witnessed such courage. You told the truth when silence would have been easier. You helped catch someone dangerous. And because of that, I'm giving you something very special. Honorary Junior Justice Advocate, Lily Grace. And this is from Shadow. He wants you to have something that reminds you you're never alone. In the months that followed, Lily's story spread across the country. Schools used it to teach children that all voices matter. Trauma specialists revolutionized their approach to child witnesses. Courtrooms began implementing therapy animals as standard protocol for child testimony. I showed my students Lily's story. One girl raised her hand and said, I've been silent too, but maybe I can speak now. That's what Lily did. She gave permission to be heard. I was afraid to testify. I was afraid no one would believe me. Then I heard about a 3-year-old girl who spoke truth through a dog. And I realized, if she could be that brave, so could I. This case changed how I see justice. Justice isn't about winning. It's about listening. And sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places. From a child's whisper. From a dog's unwavering presence. From a moment when the system stopped talking and started truly hearing. Lily was 3 years old when she changed the law, when she changed her courtroom, when she changed what justice means. All she needed was someone, something, that made her feel safe enough to tell the truth. That's the power of being heard. That's the power of compassion. That's the power of a child who refused to stay silent. And that's the power of one faithful dog who understood that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply listen. Shadow returned to duty with a newfound purpose. Children across the city sent him letters and treats. Schools began using therapy animals in their trauma protocols. And Lily learned to draw pictures just for joy, not for testimony, not to prove anything, just to draw, freely, safely, whole. This story is inspired by true cases where therapy animals have transformed victim testimony and changed how the legal system understands trauma-informed justice. Lily Grace is now thriving. She speaks freely. She draws. She laughs. She knows she was heard. Shadow continues his work, helping other children find their voices. And justice, real justice, remembers that the smallest voice can speak the greatest truth.